And we are live, I think. We
Hello,
are.
this is Hiram Monkinik.
This is Deacon Joseph Swaden, and this is, as always, the Orthodox Apologetics channel, back from a pretty long break. And We're going to talk about toll houses. The reason why is because we did a show, probably about a month and a half back, was it, Father, called Orthodoxy versus Purgatory?
Uh,
Yeah, and what happened was we kind of like kind of contraposited, the Orthodox teaching of the toll houses versus the Roman Catholic doctrine of purgatory. But there wasn't actually like we didn't really go into too much detail, or maybe we went into detail and we just forgot. Um, in terms of what the toll houses actually are, because I think that's where a lot of people get lost. Um, like I was looking at some arguments on the toll houses. And there was this one, I don't know if you've seen the Orthodox cartoon guy, Father.
the
Uh,
Serbian dude.
yeah, he's like, hello everybody, and I paint cartoons. That guy. Anyway, the point is, so like, what's it called? And he's pretty adamantly against the toll houses, but basically he's using the arguments that we've seen rehashed from Rajapala, which is, that this is all based around the history of Elder Basil the New, and that's not true. Plus, on top of that, there are 10,000 toll houses. We don't know if there are 20. We literally don't have any concepts of these that you can actually dogmatize on. But to say, oh, well, the toll houses aren't real, or more importantly, the Tolonia aren't real, basically is it's arguing against the idea that angels and demons contest over our souls to begin with. And that is something that has a lot of patristic evidence behind it. So throwing that all away is a huge mistake. I think what we're going to do this episode is kind of talk about what the teaching of the church is versus the folk superstitions that have become misrepresented as the teaching of the church. And so that's kind of where I'm at, Father. How about you? How are you feeling?
I'm kind of sick. I have a lung infection, but I think I can get through it. So I'm not going to be able to talk as much because. But anyway, I think the essential nature of the Tolonia teaching is simply this: after death, when our souls depart, the angels, the good angels, and the demons, the evil angels, just simply contest over the soul, and that's part of the particular judgment. That's the essence of the teaching. All right, and if you read a very good article, it's been posted since I've had it up on NFTU since 2015 by Metropolitan Macarius Bulgakov of Moscow, who proposed in 1882, in his book Orthodox Dogmatic Theology, Volume 2, pages 526 to 538. He deals at length with this whole issue, and he presents it in a I don't know if you want to put the link to that, Father Joseph, in the chat.
Putting it up right.
He deals with everything from a scriptural and patristic point of view, and he goes through different accounts. He stays close to what the fathers and scripture say. He again points out what it says in the Gospel of Luke, where when the man, in the Gospel of Luke, in Luke 16, God says to the man, "Thou fool, do you not know this very night your soul will be required of you?" That's kind of what it says in the modern version. But that what it really says in the Greek is, "Thou fool, do you not know this night they shall require thy soul of thee." All right.
Mm-hmm.
And Mitchell Macarius, if you can read I almost want to read the entire oral article. It's only a few pages, but he says at the end of it, he says, "One must, however, note that, as in general, with all depictions of matter of the spiritual world, for us clothed with flesh, there are inevitably features which are presented more or less physically, anthropomorphically. So in particular, inevitably, they occur in the detailed teachings of the toll houses, which the human soul passes upon separation from the body. And therefore we must keep firmly in mind the instruction that the angel gave the venerable Macarius of Alexandria when he began just talking about the toll houses. Quote, "Accept earthly things here as being the weakest representations of the heavenly. It is necessary to consider the Tolonia toll houses not in the rough or sensual sense, but as much as it is possible for us in a spiritual sense, and not to be tied to particulars which have been presented by various authors and in various stories of the church differently, or preserving the unity of the basic idea regarding the Tolonia or toll houses." So it's a very simple idea. And I think what happens is people present caricatures of the Tolonia where they say, well, the demons can just lie about you and it doesn't really matter, and the angels, they can't do anything really. And if the demons lie about you, they're not going to the lie is not going to survive, not going to pass by. So, I like to also remember that when you start reading through the lives of the saints, especially the early saints, um, and I'm much more familiar with the early pre-schism Western saints, but you can find them, I'm sure, in the early Eastern saints as well. We meet a lot of times with the concept of the saints battling for the souls of departed people. And one of the most famous saints is Saint Columba, the abbot of Iona, who was a Scottish and Irish saint. And if you read the life of Saint Columba by Saint Adamnan, the abbot, which is written around 700 AD, and Saint Columba died around 597 AD, we find, for example, in chapter 7 of the life of Saint Columba, we find the following. It's called the apparition of the angels carrying to heaven the soul of the blessed Brito. And it says, at another time, while the holy man, Saint Columba, was tarrying in the Ioan island, or High, now Iona, one of his monks called Brito, a person given to all good works, being seized with bodily illness, was reduced to the last extremity. When the venerable man, Saint Columba, went to visit him at the hour of his departure, he stood for a few moments at his bedside, and after giving him his blessing, retired quickly from the house, not wishing to see him die. And the very moment after the holy man left the house, the monk closed this present life. Then the eminent man, Columba, walking in the little court of his monastery, with his eyes upraised to heaven, was for a long time lost in wonder and admiration. But a certain brother named Aidan, the son of Libir, a truly virtuous and religious man, who was the only one of the brethren present at the time, fell upon his knees and asked the saint to tell him the reason of so great astonishment. The saint said to him in reply, I have this moment seen the holy angels contending in the air against the hostile powers, and I return thanks to Christ, the judge, because the victorious angels have carried off to the joys of our heavenly country the soul of the stranger, Brito, who is the first person that hath died among us in this island. But I beseech thee not to reveal this secret to anyone during my life. So that's a pretty basic, simple presentation, don't you think, Father?
I would say that that's actually, I'd say that that's right there. That is the Toll House teaching in its fullness. And I think if we go further than that, we enter into pious folk custom, so on and so forth. And if people want to say, well, that's not real, that's fine, but they can't throw away the actual teaching that angels and demons.
Was St. Columba, were these different Irish saints, the different Egyptian saints, the different Greek saints, were they simply just making all this up and having mass delusion?
Yeah,
I can't believe that. That would be a slander against all the saints to say that.
Now, we have a question on this, and all the Star Students said, I don't know much about the Toll House doctrine. From my understanding, according to the Purgatory RC doctrine, once a person enters purgatory, their destiny is set. Is it the same for the toll houses? Well, the particular judgment ultimately is what is set in terms of whether you've I guess you'd say, made it or not. But the difference is that purgatory is kind of a place to pay off sin, whereas the toll houses are actually kind of the action of the particular judgment.
I should note that RC purgatory corresponds to the Orthodox teaching of Hades, actually.
Yeah.
It's just a mutilated or kind of an added concept to that. And people misconstrue this. Purgatory has no real relation to the toll houses or the telonia. The telonia is simply about determining where you go, where your soul goes after you die. For example, you still had, even in the post-schism period, up until the 14th and 15th century, it wasn't even uncommon in the Roman Catholic circles for them to be teaching things like angels and demons contesting over souls after death to determine whether you go to purgatory, you go to heaven, or you go to hell. All right? So there's this modern attempt to conflate purgatory with telonia, which is really based upon which is also based upon, again, a confusion of what the Orthodox teaching is about the particular judgment, then the so-called intermediate state, and then the last judgment. All right? So everything is kind of thrown in there together and mixed. People are kind of vague about everything. There was partially this movement in the 20th century that came along where they wanted to supposedly de-scholasticize the church. And anything that looked like they could attack, they got rid of a lot of unnecessary scholastic stuff. That's true, but there also was this attempt to have this vague notion of the afterlife in Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
All right. And there's a lot of things we don't know, and there is a mystery to it. But there's certain set teachings. After you die, your soul departs from your body. The particular judgment takes place. Angels and demons contest over it. God pronounces the judgment. After that period, God then consigns your soul either to heaven or to Hades. Okay? If it's your saint, you go to heaven. If you're consigned to Hades, there are two parts of Hades. There's the part of the damned, and then there's the part where the Orthodox go, who have died without having brought forth fruits forth worthy of repentance, which is the upper level of Hades. And the Orthodox souls remain there until, by the bloodless sacrifice and the very many good works done for them, their souls are relieved and translated to paradise or to heaven. And that's the basics. And then at the end of the world, the last judgment, and then the new heaven and the earth. I mean, that's kind of a very basic understanding of it, if you understand me.
I think one of the dangers that we can go into, and I think this is what happens and how certain things get conflated, and I'm going to probably be regarded as an idiot for bringing this up, but in watching Avengers Endgame, there was a period where basically the characters were in something called the quantum realm, where they thought 5 years had passed, but in fact it felt like 5 minutes in there. The reason I'm bringing this up is because of the fact that when we tend to say that the soul leaves the body, we don't. The soul is not exactly, like, for lack of a better word, it's where we are, but I guess you could say dimensionally somewhere else. Like, you can't find the soul in the liver or anything like that. And the reason I bring this up is because people sometimes misunderstand that if the toll houses happen and the prayers of the church and the sacrifice of the mass is done, and this can assist the person, well, that must mean the person's in this place, years or centuries. But in reality, when they depart from the body, they're in some place else. They're in the realm of the spirits of the air, and we do not understand how time works there. So,
yeah, but my point is that we still have visions of, for example, where we know that it's not like they're going to be in the air for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a point in which their souls are going to be remanded to a certain place at one point.
And that's what the toll houses are for. Now, that's what all the stars, Ted pointed out. He said, okay, so the toll houses are part of the particular judgment where the determination of the soul goes is made.
Yes, exactly. And the Lord is involved in that. For example, and in many cases you have, for example, there's the vision of Drithelm, which St. Bede records, in which, his soul is going up, and you got the demons on one side attacking it, the angels on the other side defending it, and you got Christ there mediating. I hate to use the word mediating, saying this is true, this is not true. So sometimes this is what people complain about. They say, well, sometimes Christ appears in the particular judgment, sometimes not. There are various visions and various accounts of the story of the saints, which we have to accept as true. They weren't just simply making things up. It can't just all be distortion. But the particular judgment is taking place, all right? And ultimately, Christ is the judge, is determining what happens.
Since he's the judge, he can pop up anytime he wants. Anyway.
Exactly. Now, I should also quote again from the life of St. Columba, and here I'm going to send you the link to this, Father Joseph, in the Facebook chat. I'm not on the Google, but here, if you could post this in the chat. I would recommend people look at the life of St. Columba, because he contains a number of these accounts that contains, in essence, the teachings of the Irish and the early British church on this. In chapter 10 of the life of St. Columba, it says, in like manner, at another time, the holy man, while living in the Iowan island, one day, suddenly raising his eyes to heaven, spoke these words, "Happy woman, happy for thine holy life, whose soul even now the angels of God are carrying to paradise." Now there was a certain religious brother, Genera by name, a Saxon or Englishman, and a baker engaged in the baker's work, who had heard this word proceeding from the mouth of the saint. And on the same day of the month, at the end of that year, the saint says to the same Genera the Saxon, "I see a wonderful thing. Behold, the woman of whom I spoke in thy presence a year ago is now meeting in the air the soul of a certain countryman, her husband, and together with the holy angels is fighting for that soul against hostile powers. By their assistance and the righteousness of the same poor man recommending him, his soul is snatched from the contentions of the demons and led through the place of eternal refreshment." So even in that account of St. Columba, none of the angels, but the souls of the saints are constantly praying for the souls of the departed. All right? So to me, far from this being this terrifying, I mean, I know it's the particular judgment is to be terrifying, all right, because we have to be worried about our souls. But there's also a massive amount of comfort knowing that we have the prayers of the church on earth and the intercession of the church in heaven as well. Yeah, so we're not just thrown out there with no help.
Well, I think the part of the problem is that it's always the concepts, especially the more folksy concepts of toll houses, are presented as some sort of fear monger, which doesn't make any real sense. Hell is to be feared. This doesn't make it a little scarier or anything like that. The simple reality is, whether the demons contest over your soul, or if we want to imagine that they're not there, you go to hell. They're both pretty terrifying things, and ultimately, they're pretty much the same terrifying thing, except the difference is how you get there.
Now, you also and I should note. I mean, obviously, I don't know a lot about all the folklore traditions. I mean, maybe I've read them in books and things, and there's probably crazy stuff in there. And the church doesn't necessarily endorse folklore or whatever.
Yeah.
But even in folklore, even in Orthodox Christian folklore, there's still a lot of good. I don't know if you know the story. Everybody kind of knows it. At least I kind of heard it over and again. Of the old woman in the onion. You know the story, Father Joseph?
Old woman in the onion?
Okay, there was this old it's a Russian folklore tale. There was this woman, and she was always mean to everybody. She never had anything good to say about anybody. She always talked bad about everybody. She never, finally she dies. Okay.
Okay.
And as her soul leaves, like the angel's like, well, there's, she didn't die. What am I supposed to do? And the demons just take her soul, because the angel can't really say anything. And so the guardian angel goes before Christ, after the woman's been taken to Hades, to hell, presumably, to the lower part. And the angel says is like talking to the Lord, and says, Lord, is there something, I have to do something for this woman. And Christ says, obviously it's presented in anthropomorphic sense. And Christ says, well, does she ever do anything good? Now, Christ obviously knows, but this is how folklore is presented, all right? And the angel says, well, she once threw an onion at an old beggar, and the old beggar starved to death. And so Christ says, well, go take that onion and go extract her soul from the flames. Okay? And so everybody's laughing at this story, but here's what happens. The angel takes the onion, whatever.
I was going to try not to.
Okay, so the angel takes the onion, he finds it's, mystical, spiritual, whatever. And he goes and he tells woman, she's writhing in the flames, and the angel says, grab onto the onion. We're going to get you out of here. And she's beginning to pull she's getting further and further out of the flames. But then the other souls begin to latch onto her, and they're being dragged out too. Other souls. And then the woman turns around and says, let go, it's mine. And then a voice from heaven says, drop it. And he drops it, and she falls back into the flames. Now, everybody laughs at that. I'm sure, like the Bahalo, and they'll be like, oh, this stupid Russian folklore. But do you see what's being taught in that tradition, that folklore? Why was the woman, even in hell, she could not, even when something was being done, good was being done for her, she could not what? Why couldn't she? She couldn't allow other people to benefit from her actions. She was still, how do you say, she was still unrepentant even in hell. Yeah. I don't know if you understand the meaning of the story.
Of course. And
obviously, it's a lot of it's anthropomorphic, and if you try to super analyze some of these things, they're going to break down, because they're not really meant to be super analyzed. All right. So, I'm just throwing that out there. I know it kind of detracted from the general milieu, but I just thought, even in folklore that people kind of laugh out, there's actually a lot of lessons, deep held lessons in the consciousness of the Orthodox culture there, even if people don't always realize it.
Oh, absolutely. No, I don't doubt that. I kept thinking she has layers. But anyway, I won't go there. Ogres and layers. So. All right. So basically, I think that's. We've covered the folkloric aspect. As I said, if you look at the links that we've provided here, you find a number of fathers who are all teaching about the nature of the particular judgment and the contestation between the angels and the demons. This is not controversial stuff. And when people try to make it controversial and say, it's something else, it's much more sinister, usually it's because they want to revert to some sort of Protestant thinking where it's just like, heaven and hell are just kind of like states you get to automatically as soon as you're dead, and that's it.
Now, I'd also like to quote from the life of St. Oswald, the Archbishop of York, who reposed in 992. And this is before the schism, so this is a 10th century English saint. And in the life of St. Oswald, there's a mention of what happened to the soul of the Holy King Edward the martyr. And it says, Britfith of Ramsey, when writing the life, says the following: in truth, the soul of the most blessed man, that is the holy martyr King Edward, by the most judge commanding, the holy angels were receiving into their hands, which they were wanting to carry to the joys of the heavenly kingdom. But the others, the demons, were opposing this. They wanted to impede it, and by their machinations they sought to ensnare it. For thus was shown in a vision. And when concerning the same Saul many angels were fearing that from them it would be carried off by the malignant ones, a voice came down from heaven, which thus resounded, saying, This was the voice, indeed, of the righteous judge, whom by command the supernal virtues and all the armies of the celestial kingdoms obeyed, saying, Lead ye it, that is the soul of holy King Edward, to the refreshment of paradise, and in 5 years hence I will show forth his worth, who though innocent was murdered. For thus this was done, that which the celestial judge commanded, and the many years accomplished, he commanded his serving ministers, that they would lead his blessed soul to the sight of his endless majesty. And when these years had been accomplished, many signs of miracles were performed at his sepulchre, such that it would not be possible to relate them. So that's another example. I probably have on my computer here a number of examples from various Irish, English, French lives of the saints, and I'm sure people can multiply the same from North African, Egyptian, Greek, and Syrian saints. And you can read the dialogue of St. Gregory the Great and find similar accounts. So if the problem is that if the saints didn't know what they were talking about, and they're all kind of in unison when they speak about this contestation between angels and demons, if they weren't competent to render a judgment upon all these accounts, then who else? And this is what I'm very fearful, this modern idea where, for example, people feel that they know better than the concourse of the saints when they spoke about these things. For example, it's like someone might say something like, "Oh, the Abbot Aligernus of the 10th century Monte Cassino, he's not really a saint." I mean, I think I've heard somebody say that because I guess he was, I don't know, Italian or something, and he was right on the edge of the schism like 50 years before it. But Saint Nilus of Rossano, who's certainly a saint on the Byzantine Athonite calendar, lived with Abbot Aligernus of Monte Cassino, and he said he was a saint. So who do I trust? Some 20th century, 21st century renovationist, or Saint Nilus of Rossano about who's a saint? And the same thing for all these other saints about teachings on the Telonia, if you understand my meaning, Father. Mm-hmm. So to some extent, we have to kind of say the saints, since they're teaching this in unison, and this is the consensus, we have to lay aside our own understandings and kind of submit.
And it's of East and West.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the things I remember hearing from the anti-Telonia people, that no Western saint, Western father ever taught the Telonia. And it's totally false when you start reading the Irish saints, the English saints, Spanish saints, Italian saints, French saints, Gaulish saints. You encounter this a whole lot, even in the pre-schism liturgy about the Archangel Michael delivering the souls from the demons trying to snatch it after death. I mean, this is. I mean, again, yeah, you don't have the complicated mention of 40 toll houses or 20 toll houses, but that's not even in the Eastern books, I don't believe. No, I mean, I think that's in the life of Elder Basil the New, and
people treat that like that is the dogmatic.
Exactly, they act like that is the definitive thing, and that is what the that's what the Telonia is. Whereas Metropolitan Macarius of Moscow says that you can look at that, and the problem is that there are like 7 or 8 versions of it. Some of them have heretical stuff in it. Some of them don't have heretical stuff in it.
Yeah, but ultimately, you don't even have to reference that to understand.
Yeah. And again, if you look at Metropolitan Macarius' presentation, it's very solid based on scripture and patristics. And I don't even think he doesn't really go a lot into Elder Basil the New, except for maybe mentioning it a few times. It's not a central part.
I don't remember him even mentioning it.
I think he mentioned something about that there's a detailed account in the life of Elder Basil the New, and that's about it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, everything else centers on Saint Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Epiphanius, Macarius of Alexandria, Saint Basil the Great, Palladius of Eleanopolis, Saint Cyril of Alexandria, Saint John Climacus, Saint Theodosius of the Kiev Caves, and Saint Kirill Torov, etc., and several other figures.
Guardian Angel,
the Canon of the Guardian Angel, the prayer after the fourth baptisma, and so on and so forth. All right.
Now, Timur Mildred asks, is there any connection whatsoever between hesychasm and the toll houses? 2 totally separate ideas. I'm just curious.
Well, hesychasm is the practice of saying the Jesus prayer, and obtaining spiritual, and basically experiencing the uncreated light eventually. That purifies the soul. Hesychasm is more than, I'm simplifying it very
right. Yeah, but it definitely,
it's part of repentance, and you want to be repentant and ideally purified when as much as possible when your soul leaves the body. That's part of preparation for dying.
So in that sense, I guess.
Say that again.
I said, so in that sense, I guess, because I guess you'd probably be able to walk through the whole houses pretty easily.
Well, remember, even Holy King Saint Edward the Martyr, who was a martyr, according to Bridtford of Ramsey, and what the people saw, that when he died, that even then the demons were trying to snatch his soul away. All right, so now that just might have been, I don't know, something about how Saint King Edward the Martyr died. I don't even know, because in some of these accounts, like in Saint Columba's account, you were having souls going up, and the demons were trying to attack it, and they were kind of falling away. So it can be different for each person. But I don't know much more to say on this subject, Father.
If anyone has any questions, we're going to be on for basically, I don't know, I guess another half hour or so. But yeah, we'll be glad to take them. But yeah, it's again, it's the only reason we brought this up, and I do recommend, after listening to the show, if you still have questions on full houses, to follow up with the show Orthodoxy versus Purgatory. Because I think we, between the links, if you look at the links that we have on the side here in the chat, that go to the lives of various saints, to Metropolitan Vicarius's exposition on the 12 houses, etc., it's pretty much a cut and dry thing. There's not really a there's no great movement you find before Lazar Bahalo and his attempt to.
There was some sort of dispute, vaguely recalling, between the disciples and the followers of Saint Theophan the Recluse and Saint Ignatius Bryan-Chaninoff, but that was about that was about the materiality of the soul or something like that. And sometimes people try to confute that with an early anti-Telonia teaching, but they both actually believed in it. There was this disputation about to what extent can you call the soul material, because only God is ultimately immaterial. All right, but that's every now and again I hear people bringing that up, but they both actually believed in this disputation after death.
Yeah,
right?
The fact that the soul is material does not necessarily mean it's material as we are material, because there's different levels of materiality.
Yeah, but yes, and of course, ultimately, only God is truly immaterial. When we talk about the immaterial powers, they're only immaterial in a certain comparison. All right, because ultimately, only God is completely other, uncreated, and such.
Timur Mildred asks, can you guys do a show on all or most of the Orthodox popes of Rome, if possible at some time? Obviously, it doesn't have to be next video. I'm going to assume you mean the great sainted popes of Rome, because you're talking about 1,000 years of popes, and that's a lot of popes, and some of them didn't do much, to be quite honest. And that would be way longer than even a 2-hour show. St. Gregory the Great alone could take up an hour.
One could read the Liber Pontificalis. You can, if you go in Google Books and type in Liber Pontificalis, you can find the free one that goes up to about the year 700.
Yeah.
It contains a lot of different traditions of the Roman clergy and things like that, but it gives you basics of what a lot of the Roman clergy were saying about the various popes, like St. Gregory and St. Innocent and things.
If you have a link, Father, if you could send it to me, I'll put it up for everyone. That way, you can actually, even before doing the show or anything like that, and if you guys want to take a look, the Liber Pontificalis, the early Liber Pontificalis, contains the lives of the holy popes.
Oftentimes they may be a short entry, like so-and-so did this and this and this, and then he died.
Yeah.
Here, I sent you a link there, Father, to the Facebook chat.
Give me 1 second, I'll put it up. Hold on. Let's open that up. And we're going to just put this. Now, this goes up to the pontificate of St. Gregory the First.
Yeah, I believe so.
So, hold on. I'll just put this up for the group. And that way, if you want... Okay, it says it's too long. Give me 1 second. Okay. I'll just say book. Okay. So I hope that helps, Timur. Yeah, I agree. The Hildebrandian thesis is very useful in understanding how different the popes before the schism and the popes after the schism were. It is really where you discover the establishment of the roots of what we call Roman Catholicism today. So in any case, let's see what else we've got here. Okay, if anyone else has any questions, or if you have more questions, Timer, or the weird religious group, I know we went off. We were off the show for what, I think like 2 or 3 weeks. I think because we all had different things to do. First, Brighton came, and then you went to Greece.
Yeah, I went to Greece.
Came back to Greece?
Yeah, I was in Greece for a week.
Yeah, and then that's when after that, Father got sick, so we weren't able to do another show. But yeah, if you're on the, I don't know if you put pictures on the Warzone. I think you might have. But in any case,
no, I put it on a different group.
Oh, okay. Well, in any case,
I mean, it's nothing big. It's just pictures of clergy can celebrate it.
Yeah, processions and stuff like that. All right. Well, don't feel pressure. I mean, we're just we're here to answer questions and to discuss. Father, do you feel like there's anything to discuss, like in terms of Orthodox apologetics or weird things happening in Orthodox?
What was that?
I thought it was you.
No, I'm sorry. No, not really. I think.
Oh, Sean says you got time for a big question. Well, we got 29 minutes, so
yeah,
let's
go
see
ahead.
how big the question is. Outside of that,
well, tell me when the question is asked.
Yep, I will. I'll read it. We are all waiting with bated breath for Sean's question.
I mean, after the question, if it's not going to take up the rest of the time, we can kind of discuss some of the other subjects we saw on the War Room. I mean, if people have any more Telonia questions, anything more specific, I don't know what else I could do except read the essay by Metropolitan Macarius, or you could read it.
Well, I put a link up to it. I mean, outside of that, I think it's not okay. Let me see. Oh, okay. We got a weird group of the week. So while we're waiting for Sean's big question, let us click on Johannite.org. The Apostolic Johannite Church. Oh, and it's got a picture. It's got a picture of a statue of St. John the Baptist, I presume, or it could be Jesus, or actually it could be a lot of people with a big cross. And I'm going to assume, let's see here, what do they do? Enacts the Johannite tradition through an esoteric, Gnostic, and Christian path of spiritual understanding and self-discovery.
Sounds like Theosophy.
Yeah, it sounds like a Theosophist.
Like the liberal Catholics Theosophy stuff?
Yeah, it's got like this. Their seal is like an eye over what looks like an eagle or like some kind of bird with a suit on over a flame. And it says, Ecclesia Apostolica Ioanninum in principio erat verbum. Oh, that's cute. It's the Apostolic Church of John. In the beginning was the Word. I'm pretty sure the Word cannot be found in this thing. Okay. It sounds like a Theosophist group. Let's see, Johannite spirituality. Many of us seek a real spiritual community, which is loving, inclusive, spiritually lively, and empowering people of all genders, races, and sexualities, both rich and
I'm sorry, I'm coughing. I'm coughing for many reasons.
It's ridiculous. Oh, wow, this is terrible. We fully embrace the beauty and mystery of the living Christian tradition, candles and incense, ancient rites such as baptism and the Eucharist, and robed male and female priests.
Yeah, it's some kind of weirdo liberal Catholic Theosophist gay group or whatever, All right, now it looks like Sean Ridlin has finally asked typed up the question. So if you could read it, Father.
Okay, it says, in the GOC Confession of Faith, Article 1, Section 8, it says, moreover, I give assent and credence to the decisions of the Holy Pan-Orthodox and its convened in 1583, 1587, and 1593, condemn the introduction into the Orthodox Church of the so-called Gregorian new calendar promulgated by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582. Was it not the Synod in Resistance that in 2011 published a work on the Sigillion of 1583 in which they stated that this was a spurious work? While I am familiar with the Sigillion and the article repudiating it, I was interested to know if the Synod in Resistance repented of this and provides a correction, or if the GOC published a rebuttal. By
GOC, I think they mean the Kalinico Synod.
Right. And I'm going to assume that, and this is, I'm going to make a few assumptions here because we're not in the GOC Kalinikos or in the Synod of Resistance, so we don't actually.
And there is no Synod of Resistance anymore anyway.
Yeah, it's gone. So, my guess is that to answer the first question, as well, maybe we're going backwards here. did they rebut or did they retract this argument that the Sigillian of 1583 was spurious? My guess is that they didn't. I don't, while it is debatable as to whether or not that was a pastiche to work by a monk of Athos or not, what is indisputable is that there were, in fact, pan-Orthodox synods convened in 1583, 1587, 1593, where they were long understood to have condemned the Gregorian calendar because of records of the synodal meetings that have nothing to do with the text of the Sigillian. So the question of whether or not the Gregorian calendar was condemned at these synods is not. It's not supported by by the Sigillian of 1583, and that's actually the Synod and Resistance's position, if I remember that paper correctly, is that they said basically you can prove just from the histories the statements that the Pan-Orthodox synods condemned the Gregorian calendar without referring to this document. Now the question is the document genuine or not? It's a tough question because it seems to be implying that it was based on Kirill-Lakaris' confession. I have read Kirill-Lakaris' confession once or twice, and I don't see the wholesale lifting. It kind of reminds me of the whole, saying that the protocols of the Elder of Zion were lifted by Montesquieu, and I've never found very good parallels in it. So I don't know how authentic the Sigillian of 1583 purported is. But
apparently people were talking about it for hundreds of years and accepting it, even if, isn't that something?
Doubted it. And the point is, if you look at the conciliar records, that what these synods was called for is known, with or without it. So I say that there are two different questions. The first question is the tradition of the church that the synods in 1583, 1587, 1593 condemned the Gregorian calendar? Yes, and everybody accepted that. And then the question becomes, but is the Sigillian, which claims to be a 1583 real? That's much more of an open question. And, I'd say between the synod's work, defenses of the Sigillian that have been written, I would say just, read through them and make your own judgment. But it does not actually affect what the Pan-Orthodox Synod said, which is in the records. It's kind of like creating a red herring. You say, well, this document is false, therefore these synods didn't teach that. That's not true.
Now, if you read, here, I'm going to give you the link to Mitchell and Cyprian's article. And actually, if you look through the article, he seems to be arguing, from what I can tell, that there probably were several decrees that were a lot of pasted together, but they still, in essence, it's still valid. That seems to be. Maybe you can look at it, Father Joseph.
Okay, let me take a look and I'll put the link.
Because he quotes Patriarch Dositheus of Jerusalem, who in his Paralipomena of Book 11 of the Dodecabilos repeats in summary form that the plenary synod in Constantinople in 1593 decided, quote, the Pascha should occur as determined by the first synod, and that the calendar concocted by the Latins should be anathematized. So Patriarch Dositheus was living in the 1670s or 1660s, so it wasn't that far away from the 1590s that people couldn't have asked, did this actually happen? Let's see.
Well, I'm looking at the text right now, but
it says the only tomos that survives the aforementioned Alexandrian tomos, concerning the Paschalion, which was composed, though in the manner of refutation, by his beatitude, his All Holiness Pope Meletius of Alexandria concerning Pascha. It says, nevertheless, the extant documents of 1583 and 1593 can be regarded in a broad sense as tomoi of these synods, since there's a joint epistle of Patriarch Jeremiah II of Constantinople and Sylvester of Alexandria to the Armenians, interestingly, dated November 20th, 1583, since, quote, this epistle was written in the wake of the synod that was convened that year in Constantinople, which condemned the Gregorian calendar primarily because, according to the latter, it may happen that we will celebrate together with the Jews, contrary to the Synod of Nicaea. So he seems to support the idea that this theory that the joint epistle of Jeremiah and Sylvester to the Armenians, which we do know existed, can be regarded as the tomos of the Synod of 1583, and it's corroborated by the fact that it is often characterized as the publication of a synodal decision. Then the later issues get to be about this Father Iakovos of New Skete in 1858 in Athos.
I'm sorry if I seem distracted. I just read the latest question, and I don't know what this is, Father. It's it says, "Have you heard of the claims that Justinian was an Aphartodocetist?"
Apologeticism.
No.
Yes, you find this in some of the accounts of later Justinian's life, that as he got older, like before he died, he supposedly assented to Julianism or Orthodoceticism. And Orthodoceticism, as I recall, is the teaching of Julian of Halicarnassus, I believe. And Julian of Halicarnassus was kind of some sort of a Monophysite bishop, and he believed that our Lord's flesh never was impervious to physical suffering. Could, in fact, not, and that when he was crucified, the nails only appeared to go through the flesh, or that, and it didn't really. So it's actually a form of Doceticism. Now, some people try to claim that, he didn't really teach this, but then there was a break between the Monophysite Armenians and Syrian Armenians, where they both, I think one of them anathematizes the other for this, and that's still in their books. It's a weird situation. I mean, they're not Orthodox, but supposedly the Emperor Justinian was convinced to assent to some form of Orthodoceticism and wanted to impose it, but he died before he could. Now, I don't know if that really happened, if he really said that, or there was enemies who said he said that. The other point is that after the Emperor Justinian, as he kind of got older, I think he was like 80 in his 80s, which was still kind of long-lived in the 500s. He had also survived. He had also survived the Black Plague. People forget, and we do kind of know he was having mental lapses near the end of his life. And so what happened is that they just kind of let the emperor just say stuff, because he was kind of there, but he was kind of not there. This is how I understand it. And the patriarch was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't sign this document, but the emperor's saying I can. But no one wanted to excommunicate the emperor, because they kind of thought he wasn't all there.
This is how they dealt with Alzheimer's back then.
Yeah, but he's still the emperor, and he could order some crazy stuff, because So what happens is he dies. He dies before anything happens, and they're like, thank God. They didn't want to condemn him, but it's kind of like he's like kind of the old doddering man who was this great emperor, and now he's kind of. I think his mom. I think he was just an old man. He was mentally losing it. He was, and that happens. And then people could get around him and say, well, you need to accept this new teaching of this Bishop Julian, and if you do, it will cause the Monophysites to become Orthodox, and he's maybe losing it at the same time. And when that happens, everybody's trying to control some. It's like a dying leader. Everybody's around him trying to influence him. So, but the church has never really held that against him. So again, I don't believe he was endorsing it in some full mental capacity. Otherwise, the consciousness of the church would never have accepted him as a saint.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. I hate to say that, but
because there's a human aspect to saints too when they get older, and especially
having seen it among even family members, so on and so forth, like elder dementia, it's sad. It's and you realize
you don't even have to be demented. You can just simply be your memories going. I mean, that happens to all kinds of people. So, all right. So, anything we've learned from this article by this Metropolitan Cyprian?
Yeah, I think that basically Sean says, okay, so red herring makes sense. It read to me that basically Cyprian was saying a forgery wasn't needed and made them look bad. Again, now the jury's out on that one, because if it was a forgery, we don't know what. If they
they're agreeing that there were tomoses issued against New Calendar in the Pascha.
Yeah,
we do have these. The question is were they all kind of woven together in some 4-page document or something
exactly.
like that.
And then but then that wouldn't even be a forgery. That would simply be a reworking of existing text into a new form, which is not necessarily better, but it's not what I would call a forgery. It's what you would call a pastiche.
Yes.
So in any case, I think that I think we clarified that, and I hope that having access to more documents is always a good thing. Let me see here. Okay, timer and assault rifle are basically just clarifying. I guess assault rifle was tempted by the arguments of the Monophysites. I don't know if I think he watched that show. I hope that was helpful. When we debated Severin Zealot. Of course, Severin Zealot, wants to come back, so we will eventually have him back. I guess.
And again, if I have a copy on my desk over here of Richard Price's translation of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. I ordered it. I got it for cheap. I'm trying to find a cheap copy of the translation of the full Acts of the Fourth Ecumenical Council, as opposed to the abbreviated one we often use. That's it's very difficult to find a copy that's not like $100.
Now, wasn't that available in one of the PDF exchanges though?
I may have yes, I do have a PDF on my computer somewhere, but I have like thousands of files, and I'm probably not going to find it unless somebody sends it to me again.
Yeah,
but as I recall, if you look in the Acts of the Fifth Ecumenical Council, they have a lot of interesting documents where they have testimonies collected from previous decades about the whole Ibis letter. Okay. And, which Ibis is basically repudiating the letter, saying he never wrote it. That's why they called it the so-called letter of Ibis.
Right. They never say it is his.
And Ibis kept on saying, I did not write this, because at the Latrocinium, they said, you wrote this. Ibis like, I didn't write it. And they're like, yeah, you did. You're condemned. And, so Ibis, they read it again at Chalcedon. There's a big dispute over it, even though some of them said, we've heard him read it, we accept him as Orthodox. And then they make Ibis basically, again, accept the Orthodox confession. And it just goes on. And then at the Fifth Council, it's talked about again. They bring all these testimonies. So to me, it's a very strange subject to be brought up over and over again.
Find a way to get these books into the hands of the public, because what I've noticed happening, and I've noticed this happening on the War Zone, and next week we'll definitely devote more time to the debates on the War Zone, because we were going to just do an hour show as kind of a warm up to future shows that we're doing. But is the fact that I've seen this before. I see people do this. I've seen people do this online for years, where they'll say like, "Well, you don't have this book," and basically what they do is they kind of it's a playing with I guess you could say with information, because it allows you to misrepresent what's in a text because the other person doesn't have access to it. So I mean, this is just my kind of personal rant here. I think that and forgive me, I realize that this goes afoul of copyright law and so on and so forth, but frankly, if you've translated a text of the ancient church, we have offered, the church has offered its teaching for free throughout the ages. So I think someone translating it and then basically like kind of keeping a monopoly on it is wrong. I think that, I have no problem. I'm not saying, let's steal some books. But I'm saying, like, I have no problem with copying and digitizing it, because, frankly, it wasn't their property to begin with. So it would be like,
they took the church's property and they put it into English. That's all they did.
Yeah. So, does anybody know why NFTU.net still says copyright 2018? I believe that's because that's the last major revision of the website itself. It is having a lot of problems right now, and we are working on it. We've used some donations. Just to get, just to give it its own dedicated server, and then eventually get the community up. Right now, I'd like to see the website fully operational. But in any case, let me see here. Assault rifles. The Apologetics have some good strawman arguments that aren't really heard much. It sounded convincing at first, and there isn't much out there actually explaining why the O are wrong, but they are. But looking into it seriously, their main points are really ridiculous and petty, and their position is heretical.
Now, it's interesting because if you look at the letters of Severus of Antioch, and they're free online, he sensed that what happened at the Latrocinium was, in fact, a big problem. Because at the Latrocinium, there was the rehabilitation of guess who? Of Eutyches.
Eutyches, yeah.
And now Dioscorus was like, well, I was fooled by him. He said this. I didn't understand. And so the Orthodox were saying, wait a second. If you're claiming Ibis actually said this, but we're claiming, but maybe, why is it that Severus, Dioscorus gets off scot-free with dying in communion with Eutyches, and then Severus himself condemns Eutyches as a heretic, but somehow what's good for the goose is not for good for the gander. Ibis, who again repudiated that he ever wrote the letter, he somehow gets blamed when Eutyches was saying he believed all this stuff. All right, and so I think Severus in some of his letters tries to deal with this, and I don't think he deals with it great, but he at least sensed that this is not. He realized there was a problem. All right, and there were like 5 or 6 different Monophysite groups, by the way, too, and it was really Severus, and then kind of coalesced them all, and then they had to have the Julianist issue and all this other stuff. So,
now, Sean Ridlin writes, the claim is also used by anti-humanistic calendars, saying that the Tomos were only against the Latinized date of Pascha, not the rest of the calendar. The accusation is that the eighth paragraph is spurious. Okay, first off, that is taking advantage of a lack of historical knowledge. And what I mean by that is the Pan-Orthodox Congress of 1923 that changed the calendar over, changed the entire calendar. This is something that's forgotten. Like people tend to think, well, the new calendar only deals with the uh, non-movable dates, and it doesn't deal with the Pascalian. That's incorrect. The new calendar, as it was devised in 1923, was the Gregorian calendar. And that is actually the reason why, if you look at the Church of Finland, why it is completely new calendar, it is because it's stuck to the declaration of the 1923 Council. It was only because of mass protests in places like Greece that they backed off and changed the Pascalian back to the Orthodox Pascalian. That's how the new calendar as we know it was created, but the new calendar as it was originally created was nothing less than the Gregorian calendar.
Okay.
Let's see here. We even have that one monophyletic group that was tritheists, and all the terms of like we, subthesis, and hypothesis meant the
Yeah,
same.
by John the Grammarian, John Philipponos, the tritheist.
Okay. And so, all right, well, let's take a look here. All right, I think, we've pretty much covered everything. If anyone has any more questions, we're here for a couple more minutes yet. And so, it's nice to be back. And, we're going to try to do at least once a week and maybe twice a week over the, a little bit. Hey, truth be told, 2001 says, is one able to ask for forgiveness at home? Well, one's able to ask for forgiveness anywhere. The question is, where are you asking forgiveness from? If you're talking about can you confess to God without confession to a priest, I would say that you should confess to God and then you should go to a priest. Until you can get to a priest, you should continue confessing to God, but it is not the same as the mystery of absolution, because to the church was given the power to forgive sins. But ultimately, repentance counts for something, and it's not the mystery of repentance is not mechanical. So yeah, as soon as you realize you've done wrong, you should be asking God for forgiveness, and you should be endeavoring to make it. Timer Mildred says, are there any patriarchs to which the true Orthodox respect in the world Orthodox Church currently at the moment? No. I would say no, that not really. I mean, there has been,
they've all the ones that look like they were promising all ended up disappointing everybody.
Yeah, I mean, to that end, that's true. I mean, it's the nature of the disappointment. For a while, Patriarch Irenaeus tried to fix things, but he's been locked up. The Georgian Patriarch, he is formally anti-humanist, but it was really to stop the schism in his church. And but his
Bulgarian Patriarch has done some interesting things recently, but they're only willing to go so far. That's the problem with all these guys.
Well, part of the problem with the Bulgarians is that you keep on finding that there are connections to the state security services, to the FSB. And so, what they should do, in all honesty, is they should really depose like half those people.
Well, remember, that's actually what happened after the collapse of communism. Half the Synod tried to declare, was it Patriarch Pimen, or not Pimen, whoever the guy was, Maximus, deposed because he had been elected essentially by the communist authorities in the 50s.
Yeah,
and that created the whole alternative thing, and that was like a big catastrophe. All right, and now some of those groups later kind of joined various true Orthodox groups. Some of them went off and became their own group and whatever. But it's never really worked out, because I think everybody has too much of an institutional mentality in these groups.
Yeah, and it's going to take a long time before things can get better.
Or the Antichrist comes and it doesn't get better.
Yeah, exactly. Which, well, in that case, anyone who is faithful to orthodoxy among them is going to get chased out.
Because remember, the prophets Enoch and Elias will come, and they will proclaim the true faith. And they will for 3.5 years, and no one will be able to stop them. The Antichrist will come against them. You can't stop them. Prophet Elias will go to the Jews who call themselves Jews, and the prophet Enoch to the other world, and they will tell the truth, explain the true Orthodox faith unambiguously. And there will be those who accept it and those who reject it, and it will be unambiguous about who they are. And then at the end of the 3.5 years, according to the book of Apocalypse and the Father's interpretation, they will be slain in Jerusalem. So
we've got more questions. Is Peter the Iberian an Eastern Orthodox saint?
He's a Georgian figure that accepted Monophysitism. See, there was a period in which the Georgian church was under the Armenian Patriarch. People forget.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is when the Armenians they kind of went along with what we call the Akakian schism, and there's this whole question about when do the Armenians formally condemn Chalcedon, and there's like one council in the 530s that looks like it, and then there's like a second council of Devin in 552. But after that, it's pretty convinced that they did it. But what happened is by the 590s or 580s, the majority of the Georgians had broken away from the Armenian Patriarch, and so did the Abkhazians or Caucasian Albanians, and they formally accepted Chalcedon in the Fifth Council. All right. And there was a figure called Peter the Iberian who was kind of the saint in this period in the so-called Armenian, Georgian subject Armenian church. But as I recall, he was kind of taken off the calendar over time because he was an embarrassing figure that he had promoted anti-Chalcedonianism. Yeah. That's what I recall from off the top of my head. I don't know if you find any other information.
Yeah, according to the wiki article that's cited, it mentions on the Georgian calendar and it mentions the Syriac calendars. So my guess is it's more that he's an Monophysite saint. That I don't know.
Now it could be somebody comes up with something and they say that, oh well, he did accept Chalcedon, but he was in some murky position or whatever. But again, I think there's been really only a modern attempt, from what I understand, the past 30 years to kind of rehabilitate him.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Because he was taken off for a very long time, and then there was this attempt to kind of rehabilitate him to try to, I guess. I mean, the Georgian church was only under like this anti-Chalcedonian umbrella for like 50 years. It wasn't like it was their whole history, if you know what I mean. So it's not like some people they needed the need to rehabilitate an anti-Chalcedonian saint.
Yeah. Now, the next question is Hannah Genzabu says, "Is the World Council of Churches dangerous in your opinion?" Thanks.
Yes, absolutely. It's evil.
It's it's definitely evil. I would say that is it dangerous? It has caused more destruction probably than any other religious organization outside of Freemasonry, which is likely connected.
I mean, and it's probably an adjunct to Freemasonry. Ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. So in that sense, what it has done is it has created a life of religious indifference for many people, including those who marginally profess Orthodoxy.
And remember, the supposed Orthodox representatives who got involved in it in the 1940s started out presenting kind of interesting, positive Orthodox explanations, but they all went downhill very quickly.
Yeah.
And it was anyway.
Okay. And why is Theodora a saint for us as well? Did she repent on her deathbed? That's Assaulter Rifle 33.
That's the claim, that Saint Theodora was secretly a Monophysite. That's what the Monophysites claim. I don't believe it.
Yeah, just because they say it doesn't mean it's true.
Everybody attacked Saint Theodora because she was a former actress. She did this, she did that. She made a lot of enemies in Constantinople. And I wouldn't just, are the Monophysites correct when they claim about it, or is the Orthodox claim about it correct?
Well, I think that
I'm going to say the Orthodox claim is correct.
Yeah, I'm going to, not only that, but I mean, I hate to say this, but a lot of the Monophysite claims, even when we had Severance on, struck me as essentially dishonest. Like the idea that St. Flavian lived a couple of years later. I mean, there's no historical basis for that. Certainly the fathers at Chalcedon were still mourning his death. It's just an amazing set of...
Because I've only either he died almost at the council, like a few hours after, or he died 3 days later from his...
I heard he died a few days later. That's all I've heard.
Yeah, that's essentially the only two explanations. And
those are the only ones that apparently the fathers at Chalcedon know. So apparently, unless he was secretly hiding out, it sounds like ancient conspiracy theory or ancient aliens theory is what it sounds like to me. Sean Ridlin asks, why they call it a revised Julian? Well, yeah, that's why first off, the claim that the new calendar, they always claimed it was a revised Julian calendar anyway. Second question, if you have time, why do the true Orthodox seem not to obsess regarding the ancient patriarchates? Many think if one isn't connected to Jerusalem, Constantinople, Antioch, or Alexandria, they can't possibly be Orthodox. We'll make this the last question unless another one pops up. But the question of how things are connected in Orthodoxy has always been kind of sloppy. And what I mean by that is because we don't have this whole concept of centralization that Constantinople now is pushing for, and many are fighting against it. the claim is to the holy apostles, and to where they preached and to the churches that they taught. But heretics have taken every see for some point or another. That's happened in history. I can't imagine during a period where some of the sees you mentioned were monothelite, that being in communion with them was all that important. The point is, in a time of question, in a time of confusion and in a time of heresy, overtaking everything, then it's absolutely incumbent to preserve the faith. And questions of communion with who are secondary.
I mean, I think it would be a good idea if we could reestablish a true Orthodox patriarch in Alexandria or Antioch, but there's just no one really wants to do it apparently at this point.
So there's one more question, I guess, coming from Timer Mildred, and then we are going to go. So we're going to wait for that question, and we'll see what it is. What does praying with heretics entail? Who has to initiate the prayer, etc.? Well, definitely a heretic. And this is a good. This question is always related to, like if you have heretical family members, and they want to say grace, you can pray silently by yourself. But if you're the one asked to say the benediction, then you're basically praying. They're praying with you.
They just happen to be there. If they want to claim they're praying with you, that's not your business.
Exactly.
In fact, that's what, if you look in the 1973 ROCOR directives that were issued about this, they're very actually specific, because they encountered situations where Russian ROCOR priests would be asked to go to a school and give a talk and say a prayer. All right. And they said, well, as long as the ROCOR priest is saying the prayer, he's leading it. If everybody else is there, they're doing whatever they want to do, because we're going to be praying no matter what.
Yeah.
All right. But when people talk about joint prayer with their relatives, often means that they're like talking about holding hands and closing their eyes and saying things back and forth. That's not how we don't do
that. That's not how we do prayers anyway. So the point is, you're going to shock them one way or another when you pull out the book and start reading from it. The point is, just do it, and they'll follow along, and they'll probably ask you what that means, and that's when you explain to them how Orthodox pray, and maybe you'll get them to consider joining the Orthodox Church.
But we don't do joint services and take part in saying prayers. It's not like I'll say a prayer, you'll say a prayer, blah blah blah, all the rest. That's not what we do. That's unacceptable.
And now it's interesting, to close this up by pointing out, I get emails from an organization called Barna.org, which is they're a Protestant Christian polling group. And the latest headline I saw today was millennial non-Christians show greater spiritual curiosity than older adults. Now, that doesn't surprise me to begin with, but more importantly, it says, in fact, millennials, even those who are practicing Christians, tend to oppose evangelism altogether. What this tells me is that the damage caused by the indifference of the World Council of Churches has trained people not to try to preach the gospel, not to try to speak about the faith. But as we get to, a new incipient leading generation in the millennials, they have more questions about this than ever, and it's our job to answer those. I don't mean us personally. I mean you listening, and everyone who is Orthodox has a chance to reach out to people, and we should be. So, don't be afraid to.
I was recently sent an email by somebody, a friend of the show, and I guess this individual was a member of the Greek Archdiocese, or he's going to some kind of Greek Archdiocese event, and he was describing what was going on there. And they had like all these people from like evangelical charismatic groups giving talks, and they had people from like a Roman Catholic group giving talk, and it was about, they were talking about the church, but the church to them just meant not the generic so-called Christians. And I didn't reply. I didn't have. I think I may have replied and said something like, if obviously this is not the church they're talking about.
Yeah.
This is basically ecumenical patriarch and ecumenism, where the Christians, the church, just means everybody who kind of says they believe in the Holy Trinity or whatever. And that's still going on. It's not ended. It's not died. So, and that's and if that's what you presented as orthodoxy, it's a false orthodoxy. It's heresy, and it's going to lead your soul to destruction.
All right. Well, I think we're going to close up the show then, because it's already 9:34. No more questions there. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for participating, for asking your questions, and to everyone, have a great night. Father, benedicite.
Benedicite.